Enigma depravatio est. Enigma crudelitas est.
Was ist, was sein wird und jemals ward, erzählen die Runen von Asgard. Was ist, was sein wird, jemals ward, erzählen die Runen von Asgard.
Welcome back, my fellow seekers. Asgard, a legend we sometimes overlook, but nevertheless may give us clues to the origins of civilization. Asgard is Old Norse for Asgaro, which means the enclosure of the Aesir. It is one of 9 worlds of Norse mythology and home of the fortress of the Aesir, one of 2 tribes of gods. The other being the Vanir, who have their home in Vanaheim. Asgard is located in the sky in the metaphysical sense of relating to the spiritual connection. And it is also connected to the Midgard, the world of humanity. Most assume it clearly to be metaphysical, but we also know from studying the supernatural nature of reality that there is an overlap between the natural and the supernatural, a genus loci where the supernatural realm affects time and place, such as in the Holy Land. The Gard element in Asgard's name is a reference to the ancient Germanic concept and distinction between the Innengard and the Utengard. The Innengard means inside the fence where it is orderly, law-abiding and civil, while that is which is in the Utengard beyond the fence is chaotic, anarchy and wild. This applies to both to the geographic plane and to the human psyche. Now, linguistic anthropologists would tell you that the word Aesir derived from the Old High German or Old Gothic languages, which has its roots in the Jordanian region of the Mediterranean. So yes, Asgard may actually be inspired by Middle Eastern legends that were passed up into Europe. This might explain how megalithic architecture spread into Europe. Asgard is ultimately the model of the Innengard, this idea of a city paradise, where Jotunheim is the homeland of the giants. It is the epitome of the Utengard. This idea of giants is a repeated theme we see in key legends around the world. Referring to the giants as in the Utengard reinforces this idea that they are not human and that they are outsiders. But that doesn't mean they're necessarily giants roaming around in the woods. Actually, quite the contrary, they may have been part of the Innengard. This is more of a political mythological demonization tactic, and possibly rightfully so. This might be a later interpretation to reinforce that this idea that the race of giants were banished from the Innengard. In fact, the Asgard legend tells of after the coming of Ragnarok, 2 humans come to replace the world. This is a similar theme we see in Genesis. It could symbolize Adam and Eve, or it could symbolize those after the Great Flood, or the destruction of a lost paradise, or all those who survived Ragnarok. Another theme that we see, this idea of a destruction of a city or paradise, for the punishment of the gods or angels that may have took human-like forms in the form of giants. So the Allfather, Odin, aka God, saw that these demigods or mutants failed the test and had to be destroyed. In the legend of Asgard, they claim that these gods were gathered together in a final battle. At the same time, we also see this idea of the gods being gathered together in Plato's story of Atlantis, and in the legend of Dwarka. So this seems to be a key theme pointing to a very specific destructive period in a specific place. So the suffix in Asgard actually relates to the word garden, which hints to a confined enclosure. Asgard and Midgard are one in the same place, but a different state of existence. So the demigods, or angelic giants that inhabited the earth, possibly, are in the state of Asgard, referring to their nature, whereas humans are something in the middle, not fully divine and not fully an animal. But at the same time, the Nephilim giants are pretty much in the middle as well, but they're a little bit higher, so they're closer to the Asgardian plane. Asgard is the divine model upon which pre-Christian Norse people patterned their world. Even the word hell actually derives from that legend, from the character of Hela. So Midgard actually is the place of Ragnarok. Asgard is simply a higher dimension of Midgard. The geographic name for the Middle East may actually have a connection to the Norse idea of Midgard. For thousands of years, up to 1850 with Alfred Thainer Mannheim, that region has always been seen as the middle of the earth. So the name Midgard gives us a clue to the origins of the Asgard legend. When we break up the Old Norse epistemology with the phrase of as and God plus the garuru, which means essentially enclosure, this actually has Indo-European roots with the suffix of ansu, meaning spirit or demon, and this has a connection to the name of Anu, which is Mesopotamian goddess. Also, the cognate for Ahura comes from the word Ahura Mazda, which is Persian. When we look at the cognates of these words, such as the words of garden and yard, it essentially means the garden of the gods, or the Garden of Eden. The Icelandic scholar and historian Snorri Sturluson in the year 1220 tells in his prologue that Asgard he conjectures by making folk epistemology connection between the three A's, that is the Aesir, where men of Asia, not gods, who moved from Asia to the north, and some which intermarried with people around there. So Asia also refers to the region of Turkey. Snorri's interpretation of the 13th century foreshadows the 20th century's views on the Indo-European migration coming from the east. Snorri further writes that Asgard is a land more fertile than any other, blessed also with great abundance of gold and jewelry. Correspondingly, the Aesir exceeds beyond all people in strength, beauty, and talent. Now Snorri proposes the location of Asgard as Troy, the center of the earth, with its 12 kingdoms. But I don't think Troy fits to the reputation of this kingdom, but Egypt sure does. The region of Troy isn't the most suitable agricultural region, and its connections with the gods and over-religious connotation isn't as strong as you see in Egypt. But Snorri is right to start looking in the Mediterranean region for the origins of the Icelandic and Germanic mythologies. Also, just as in Genesis, there's a sacred tree used to symbolize the different realms, although this is an ash tree instead of a sycamore or fig tree. There's also a snake in the legend called the Midgard snake, symbolizing an evil god that Odin has to defeat. Ragnarok is a series of events, including a great battle, foretold to lead to the death of a number of great gods, the snake being one of them. Ragnarok culminates in natural disasters that submerge the world by water, echoing to Noah's flood. After these events, the world will resurface and anew in fertility. The surviving and returning gods will meet and the world will be repopulated with a few humans. This is also referred to as the Twilight of the Gods. And this all takes place in a city, echoing the legend of Atlantis. Ragnarok means the doom of the gods. But gods can't be killed unless they're talking about demigods that took a biological form. Ragnarok could also symbolize the end of the pagan world, and all this may have started with a possible real historical event, connected possibly with the last extinction event over 10,000 years ago. Most scholars who have studied the mythology don't believe that it's foretelling the future event, like the Book of Revelations. That was more of a later correlation. Ragnarok also hints of a coming of an extreme winter that lasts 3 seasons. Now, some might simply interpret this as simply Norse cultures using winter to signify death, but it could also be possible that a real natural disaster triggered a cooling event, such as the Younger Dryas. The legend also hints that all the enemies of the gods will gather in a great field 100 miles in every direction for a battle, and where the disaster happens. It just so happens that the Nile Delta field or plain is about 100 miles in every direction. More than likely, this field is not a perfect circle. It goes on to say that the field after the battle will rise out of the sea of its inundation for new green life to emerge, and that the gods that did survive along with 2 humans would return to rebuild even greater than the golden age of Asgard. So something like the Nile Delta would be very vulnerable to a flood, and the Egyptian civilization could be the last remnants of the rebuilding of Asgard, and this legend says that human civilization will become even greater. And as we see, we have reached the heavens. So this is not about a lost civilization greater than our own, but one that gave birth to ours, but had a flaw that had to be corrected to prevent some super race from taking over the whole planet and not giving humanity a chance. So I believe Asgard gives us a clue pointing to Egypt being the Garden of Eden, and possibly where the location of Atlantis is for the origins of civilization. More than likely, migrants that were dispersed from Egypt went into the Black Sea and settled in Ukraine, and then dispersed their oral traditions into Europe. So with the help of Plato and others, we can piece together this legend. Details will change over time, such as with Plato's numbers on Atlantis' dimensions may be completely wrong, which I will address in a future video. Well, this has been Enigma Seeker. Keep seeking those enigmas.
Enigma depravatio est.